Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing at the mouth of a cold cave high above an ancient valley. The wind is thin, the mountains are wide. Snow rests on distant ridges. Somewhere below, animals move across open ground, following grass, water, and season. Inside the cave there is darkness, smoke, stone, bone, ash, and the quiet evidence of humans who once lived there. But these were not humans exactly like us. They were not Neanderthals. They were not the first Homo sapiens spreading out of Africa. They were something else. A shadow branch of humanity. A people known to us mostly through fragments. A small finger bone, a few teeth, a jaw, proteins hidden in ancient bone, DNA trapped in sediments, genetic traces still living inside people today. They are called the Denisovans. For most of human history, no one knew they existed. No ancient writer named them. No myth clearly preserved them. No complete skeleton waited in a museum. They left no city, no monument, no written record. They were not discovered first through a skull or a dramatic burial, but through a tiny piece of bone from a cave in Siberia. And from that small fragment, an entire lost human world began to appear. The Denisovans are one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution. They were real, they lived, they moved through Asia, they survived in cold caves, high mountains, forests, river valleys, and perhaps tropical edges. They met other humans, they interbred. They left descendants, but not in the way a nation leaves descendants. They left pieces of themselves hidden in our DNA. And then, at some point, they vanished as a distinct people. Or at least, that is what it looks like. But what really happened to the last Denisovans? Did they die out in isolation? Were they absorbed into modern human populations? Did climate push them into shrinking refuges? Did competition with Homo sapiens weaken them? Did they live much later than we once imagined? Or are we asking the wrong question? Maybe the last Denisovans did not disappear in a single final moment. Maybe there was no last camp, no final night, no final voice echoing alone in a cave. Maybe their ending was slower, quieter, and stranger. Maybe they faded into other human groups, leaving behind not bones, but inheritance. To understand their fate, we must begin with how little we actually have. The Denisovans are not like the Neanderthals. Neanderthals left many bones across Europe and Western Asia. We can imagine their bodies, their faces, their tools, their shelters, their hunting lives. They feel close enough to picture. Denisovans are different. They are known through absence as much as presence. A tooth here, a jaw there, a fragment of bone, a signal in ancient DNA, a trace in living people. They are like figures seen through fog. And yet, those traces tell us something astonishing. The Denisovans were not a small accident in one cave. They were widespread. They were diverse. They were deeply adapted to Asia. They were part of a complex human world that existed long before our species became the only human species left. The first major clue came from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. This cave sits in a landscape where different human groups passed through over tens of thousands of years. Neanderthals were there. Denisovans were there. Modern humans may have been there too. The cave was not simply a shelter, it was a crossroads. Inside that cave, scientists found a small finger bone from a young female. It did not look like much, but when researchers studied its DNA, they realized it belonged to an unknown kind of ancient human. Not Neanderthal, not modern human, something related but separate. A new human population had been discovered from a fragment smaller than a hand. That is the strange power of ancient DNA. For most of archaeology, bones were silent unless they had shape. A skull could tell a story, a jaw could tell a story, a tool could tell a story, but a tiny fragment could be ignored. DNA changed that. Suddenly, a small piece of bone could open a lost chapter of humanity. The Denisovan genome showed that they shared a common ancestor with Neanderthals, but they were not the same people. They were sister groups, branches from an older human family tree. One branch became Neanderthals, one branch became Denisovans. Both were related to us, but both had their own long histories. And their history was not simple. Denisovans seem to have lived across enormous distances. Their genetic legacy is strongest today in some populations of Oceania, including Papuans and Aboriginal Australians, and also appears in parts of East Asia, Southeast Asia, and other regions. A gene variant linked to high-altitude adaptation in Tibetans appears to have come from Denisovan ancestry. This means Denisovans were not limited to one cold Siberian cave. They, or closely related populations, must have lived across many environments. Cold northern forests, high plateaus, Eastern Asian landscapes, possibly island routes and tropical regions. The Denisovan world may have stretched farther than we can currently prove. This matters because asking what happened to them depends on understanding who they were. If they were only one small group in Siberia, their disappearance might be easy to explain. A bad climate shift, a shrinking population, a local extinction. But if Denisovans were a widespread network of related populations across Asia, then their disappearance becomes much more complex. There may not have been one Denisovan ending. There may have been many. Some groups may have vanished early. Some may have survived longer. Some may have mixed with Neanderthals. Some may have mixed with Homo sapiens. Some may have been absorbed so completely that their bodies disappeared from the fossil record while their genes continued. Imagine a map of Asia tens of thousands of years ago, not with modern borders, not with countries, but with mountains, rivers, caves, deserts, forests, coastlines, islands, and shifting climates. Across that map, different human groups move like small fires in darkness. Some are Neanderthals in the west, some are Denisovans in the east and north, some are modern humans expanding out of Africa and across Eurasia. Some may be other archaic humans we have not clearly named yet. This was not an empty world waiting for Homo sapiens. It was already inhabited. The last Denisovans lived in a world where they were no longer alone. For hundreds of thousands of years, Denisovan ancestors may have adapted to Asian environments without encountering large numbers of modern humans. They learned their landscapes, they followed animals, they made tools, they found shelter, they raised children. They survived cold, altitude, isolation, and change. Then Homo sapiens began spreading more widely across Eurasia. Our species brought its own strengths: flexible tools, social networks, long-distance exchange, symbolic behavior, language, adaptability, and perhaps larger connected populations. But Homo sapiens did not simply erase everything in their path. The genetic evidence shows something more intimate. They met. They mixed. They had children. This is one of the most important clues to the Denisovan ending. When modern humans moved through Asia, they did not encounter monsters. They encountered other humans. Different, yes. Ancient, yes. But close enough to interbreed. Close enough for DNA to cross from one population into another. Close enough that a Denisovan ancestor could become part of the family tree of people living today. This changes the meaning of extinction. If a population disappears as a separate group but leaves descendants through mixing, is it completely gone? Biologically, no. Culturally, perhaps. Socially, perhaps. As a distinct people, yes. But not as ancestry. The Denisovans may have ended not only through death, but through merging. That is one of the most haunting possibilities in human evolution. The last Denisovan may not have died alone in a cave. The last Denisovan identity may have dissolved slowly into communities that were increasingly mixed. A Denisovan mother and a Homo sapiens father. A modern human group carrying Denisovan ancestry. Children who belonged to both worlds. Grandchildren who knew only one group, while carrying the genetic memory of another. Over generations, the name would vanish, though there was no name we know. The language would vanish. The tools might change, the stories would be absorbed or forgotten, but the DNA would remain. In this way, the Denisovans may have survived by disappearing into us. But that is only one part of the story. Climate also mattered. The world of the last Denisovans was unstable. The late Pleistocene was a time of dramatic environmental shifts. Ice expanded and retreated. Forests changed. Grasslands moved. Sea levels rose and fell. Cold periods opened some routes and closed others. Warm periods changed animal ranges. High-altitude environments became harsher, or more accessible depending on season and climate. For small human populations, this kind of change could be dangerous. A large connected population can survive local disasters. If one valley fails, another group may help. If one region dries, people can move. If one group declines, others may replace or reconnect with it. But a small, isolated group is fragile. One long winter, one failed migration, one disease, one loss of prey, one broken network, and survival becomes difficult. Denisovan groups may have been scattered across huge landscapes. Some may have been isolated in mountains or caves. Others may have lived in warmer regions where fossils preserve poorly. Their world may have been broad, but not necessarily densely populated. If their numbers were low, climate pressure could have weakened them long before modern humans arrived in large numbers. Imagine a Denisovan group in a high mountain region. They know the ridges. They know where animals pass. They know which caves hold shelter from wind. They know where water freezes late and where plants grow in short summers. But then the climate shifts, herds move, snow lasts longer. A familiar valley becomes empty. A route once open becomes dangerous. Another human group appears from the south or east, carrying new tools, new habits, new networks. The Denisovans adapt as they always have, but adaptation has limits. If there are too few people, knowledge can be lost. If too many elders die, roots can be forgotten. If children are too few, the future narrows. If groups cannot meet others, mates become scarce. If modern humans arrive with larger networks, the Denisovan world may slowly shrink. Not because Denisovans were stupid, not because they were weak, but because survival is never only about intelligence. It is also about numbers, timing, connection, geography, climate, and chance. The disappearance of a human group can happen quietly. A camp used for generations is abandoned. A cave is visited less often. A tool tradition fades. A language stops being spoken. A small group joins another. A child grows up with mixed ancestry. A valley keeps no memory. Thousands of years later, archaeologists find only fragments and ask what happened. The answer may be that everything happened at once. Climate pressure, small population size, competition, interbreeding, migration, absorption, chance. The Denisovans may not have been defeated in one dramatic event. They may have been slowly outnumbered, blended, displaced, and transformed. But there is another reason the Denisovan mystery remains so difficult. We do not yet know what many Denisovans looked like. The fossils are too few. The Siberian remains are fragmentary. The Shahe mandible from the Tibetan plateau gave us a powerful clue. Denisovans could have strong jaws and large teeth. Later discoveries and protein studies have expanded the picture. The Penghu jaw, from near Taiwan, suggests Denisovans, or Denisovan-related people, may have lived farther south and east than once proven. Some researchers have debated whether certain Chinese fossils, including large-brained Middle Pleistocene humans, could be related to Denisovans, but the picture is still unfinished. This means the last Denisovans might already be sitting in museum collections under other names. A jaw labelled as archaic Homo, a skull assigned uncertainly, a tooth without DNA, a fossil found before anyone knew Denisovans existed. For decades, scientists looked at Asian fossils without the genetic key that later revealed Denisovans. Now old bones may need new questions. Some fossils that seemed mysterious may turn out to belong to Denisovan populations or their close relatives. This is why the Denisovan story keeps changing. At first, they were a genome from a cave. Then they became a population. Then they became a continent-scale mystery. Now they are beginning to become a body, slowly reconstructed through jaws, teeth, proteins, sediments, and living DNA. But their final chapter remains hidden. One place that may hold part of the answer is the Tibetan plateau. High altitude is brutal. The air is thin. The cold can be severe. The landscape demands physiological adaptation. Yet evidence from Baishia Karst Cave suggests Denisovans lived on or near the Tibetan plateau for a very long time. This is extraordinary because it means they were not only lowland survivors, they were capable of enduring one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Tibetan clue matters for another reason. Modern Tibetans carry a version of the EPAS1 gene that helps with high-altitude adaptation, and this genetic variant appears to have come from Denisovan ancestry. In other words, Denisovans may have given later humans a biological tool for living where oxygen is scarce. Think about that. A vanished human group helped living humans breathe more easily in the mountains. That is not a small legacy. It means Denisovans were not evolutionary failures. They carried adaptations modern humans could use. When Homo sapiens entered some environments, Denisovan DNA may have helped them survive there. This makes their disappearance even more complex. In one sense, Denisovans lost their separate identity. In another sense, they helped shape the success of the people who came after them. The same may be true in Oceania and parts of Southeast Asia. Some living populations carry significant Denisovan ancestry. This suggests modern humans met Denisovan-related groups somewhere along the routes into Sahul, the ancient combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea, or in surrounding regions. The exact locations remain debated, but the signal is strong. Denisovan ancestry travelled with humans into the Pacific world. What happened there? Perhaps modern humans moving through Southeast Asia encountered Denisovan-related populations adapted to tropical forests, islands, coasts, or mountain interiors. These groups may have looked different from the Denisovans of Siberia. They may have had different tools, diets, and ways of life. They may have been separated from northern Denisovans for a very long time. This raises a remarkable possibility. Denisovan may not describe one uniform people. It may describe a wide family of related populations, as varied as Neanderthals, or even more varied. Some Denisovans may have lived in cold caves, some in high mountains, some near warm coasts, some in forests, some in regions now underwater. If that is true, then the last Denisovans may not have looked like the first Denisovans discovered. They may not have lived in Siberia, they may not have lived in caves. They may have been somewhere in East Asia, Southeast Asia, or island landscapes, mixing with modern humans long after northern Denisovan groups had faded. The last Denisovan might have lived in a place where fossils rarely survive. A humid forest, a coastal plain now drowned by rising seas, a limestone cave not yet excavated, a mountain shelter still unknown. This is why absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The Denisovan fossil record is tiny, partly because preservation is uneven. Tropical climates destroy DNA quickly. Rising seas cover ancient coastlines. Caves collapse. Bones decay. Human groups move. A people can live for tens of thousands of years and leave almost nothing behind. But DNA can travel through descendants, and Denisovan DNA tells us they were there. So what really happened to them? Let us imagine several endings. In the north, some Denisovan groups may have been replaced or absorbed as climates shifted and populations changed. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans may have overlapped in complex ways. Some Denisovan groups may have already been rare by the time Homo sapiens spread widely. On the Tibetan plateau, Denisovan groups may have survived harsh conditions for thousands of years, adapting to altitude and cold. Later, modern humans may have entered those regions, mixed with them, and inherited useful genes. The Denisovan population may have shrunk, merged, or disappeared as a separate group. In East Asia, Denisovan-related humans may have persisted in varied environments. Some fossils may belong to them, but without DNA or proteins, certainty remains difficult. Their ending may have involved long-term blending with expanding modern humans. In Southeast Asia or near island routes, Denisovan-related populations may have met modern humans moving toward New Guinea and Australia. Some of their ancestry survived strongly in people today. Their physical remains may be lost, hidden, or underwater. All of these endings could be true at once. There may have been no single last Denisovan people. There may have been last Denisovans in different places at different times. A last northern Denisovan, a last highland Denisovan, a last eastern Denisovan, a last island Denisovan. And each ending may have looked different. Some ended in isolation. Some ended in absorption. Some ended in migration. Some ended when children of mixed ancestry no longer belonged to a separate Denisovan group. This is why the phrase, "the last Denisovans," is so powerful. It makes us imagine a final person, but evolution rarely works like a final scene in a movie. Populations blur, boundaries shift, people move, children inherit mixed ancestry, cultures change, a group can disappear without a final dramatic death. The last Denisovan may not have known they were the last. They may have sat beside a fire with people who looked slightly different. They may have shared food, tools, shelter, and stories. They may have had children whose descendants became part of modern human populations. They may have watched their old group shrink, not as a sudden catastrophe, but as a quiet transformation. One day, no one was purely Denisovan anymore. But Denisovan ancestry remained. That may be the real answer. The Denisovans did not survive as a separate human population. But they did not vanish completely. They became part of us. This does not make the loss less profound. A genome is not a language. A gene is not a story. DNA cannot preserve the sound of Denisovan voices, the shape of their songs, the names they gave mountains, the gestures they used around fire, the fears they whispered in darkness, or the way they taught children to read tracks in snow. If Denisovans had culture, and they surely did, most of it is gone. Their tools may remain in some places, but often we cannot confidently identify them. Their camps may be buried. Their memories are silent. Their myths, if they had them, have vanished. Their way of seeing the world is lost. What remains is biology, fragments, and inference. That is both beautiful and sad. It means we can say they mattered, but we cannot fully know them. We can see their shadow in our genes, but not their faces clearly. We can hold a jaw and imagine a person. We can study a tooth and imagine a life. We can read DNA and discover kinship. But we cannot ask them who they were. Still, the evidence we have is enough to change the human story. For a long time, people imagined evolution as a simple ladder. Primitive humans below, modern humans above, one species replacing another, progress moving forward in a clean line. Denisovans destroy that simplicity. They show us a braided human past, a world where different human groups overlapped, met, mixed, separated, and influenced one another. A world where our species did not rise alone, but inherited from others. A world where extinction and survival could happen at the same time. The Denisovans are gone. The Denisovans are still here. Both statements can be true. They are gone as voices, bodies, communities, and separate populations. They are still here in small fragments of ancestry, in high-altitude adaptation, in immune signals, in the genomes of living people whose ancestors met them long ago. This is not just a scientific mystery, it is a human one. Because the Denisovan story asks us what it means to disappear. If no one speaks your language, are you gone? If no one remembers your stories, are you gone? If your bones are dust, are you gone? If your DNA helps someone breathe on a mountain thousands of generations later, are you still present? The answer is not simple. Maybe humans survive in layers. Bodies vanish first. Then names. Then stories. Then tools. But sometimes, beneath all of that, something remains in blood, cells, and inheritance. The Denisovans became a hidden layer of humanity, and we are only now learning to see it. Imagine one of the last Denisovan camps. Perhaps it is in a cave high on a plateau. Perhaps it is near a forest river. Perhaps it is close to a coastline now swallowed by the sea. The people sit around a fire. They are not ghosts. They are living humans of another kind. They have hands strong from work, eyes trained by landscape, memories of roots and animals, knowledge of seasons, bonds of care and conflict, hunger, fear, skill, and hope. Outside, the world is changing. New people are moving through nearby valleys. The climate is shifting. Animals are changing their routes. Old networks are weakening. The Denisovan group must decide whether to move, stay, join, avoid, trade, fight, or merge. Maybe they do not think in terms of species. Why would they? They think in terms of people they know and strangers they do not, in terms of food, weather, danger, mates, children, shelter, and tomorrow. A modern human group arrives. At first, there is distance, watching, caution, maybe fear, but perhaps there is also curiosity. Perhaps tools are exchanged. Perhaps food is shared. Perhaps one group knows a route the other does not. Perhaps one group has firewood, the other has stone. Perhaps one person from one group joins the other. Then children are born. Those children carry both histories. They do not know they are evidence. They do not know scientists will one day search for them in genomes. They simply live. This may be how the last Denisovans passed into the future. Not with an ending, but with children. Not with silence, but with a new mixture of voices. Not with disappearance, but with transformation. Of course, we must be careful. Much remains unknown. Scientists continue to debate which fossils belong to Denisovans, how many Denisovan populations existed, where they lived, how they moved, and when the last distinct Denisovan groups disappeared. New discoveries may change the story again. A single tooth, a cave sediment sample, a jaw, or an ancient genome could reshape everything. That uncertainty is part of the fascination. The Denisovans remind us that the past is not fully excavated. It is still beneath floors, in museum drawers, in cave dust, in tropical islands, in mountain limestone, in drowned coastlines, and inside living DNA. Each discovery opens another door. The finger bone opened the first door. The Tibetan jaw opened another. Sediment DNA opened another. Protein evidence opened another. Modern genomes opened many more. And behind each door is the same question: who were they? Not only as genetic relatives, not only as an extinct population, but as people. People who woke in cold caves. People who carried tools. People who watched animals move across valleys. People who knew landscapes we have forgotten. People who may have met our ancestors face to face. People whose children may have become our ancestors too. The last Denisovans are not just a missing chapter. They are a reminder that humanity was once plural. There was not one kind of human walking the earth. There were many. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo sapiens, perhaps others still unnamed. Each carried its own history. Each adapted. Each tried to survive. Today, only Homo sapiens remains as a separate human species. That fact can make us feel alone. But the Denisovan legacy reminds us that we are not made only from ourselves. Our story contains traces of other humans. The boundary between us and them was never as clean as we once imagined. Some of them became part of us. This is the deepest answer to what happened to the Denisovans. They were not simply wiped away. They were not simply replaced. They were not simply forgotten. They were transformed by the same forces that transform all human worlds: climate, movement, contact, love, conflict, survival, children, and time. Their separate road ended, but small parts of that road joined ours. So when we ask, what happened to the last Denisovans, we should imagine more than extinction. We should imagine a fading campfire whose sparks are carried into another fire. We should imagine footprints that disappear into a larger trail. We should imagine a voice lost as a language, but an inheritance preserved in breath, blood, and bone. The last Denisovans may have disappeared from the visible world, but they did not completely leave the human story. They are still present in the high mountains, where their genes helped later people adapt. They are still present in the islands and regions where their ancestry remains stronger. They are still present in the questions scientists ask when a strange jaw or tooth appears from the past. They are still present whenever we remember that humanity was once a family of many branches. And perhaps that is why they fascinate us so deeply. Because the Denisovans are both strangers and relatives. They are distant yet intimate, lost yet inherited, extinct yet not entirely gone. The last Denisovan did not leave us a message. No words carved in stone, no final image, no name, but the earth kept traces. A cave kept a finger bone, a plateau kept a jaw, sediment kept DNA, a sea channel kept a mandible. Living people kept fragments of ancestry, and science, slowly, patiently, began to listen. The story is still unfinished. Somewhere, perhaps, another Denisovan fossil waits in a cave. Another protein waits inside an old bone. Another genome waits in sediment. Another clue waits in a museum drawer. And when it is found, the last Denisovans may change again. They may become less ghostly, more human, more visible, more real. Until then, we stand at the cave mouth, looking into darkness, holding a few fragments and asking what happened. The answer is not one thing. They adapted. They spread. They endured. They met us. They mixed with us. They declined. They disappeared as a separate people. And they survived inside the human future. That is what really happened to the last Denisovans. They became ghosts in the fossil record. They became ancestors in the genome. They became one of the hidden roots of humanity. And although their fires went out long ago, a few sparks are still carried in us.